Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to do a show me. I'm a little riled up, and it's about bandsaw blade drift. There are so many myths and misinformation out there that it drives me crazy. What brought this subject up to begin with was when I did my laser light on the bandsaw video. I had somebody actually tell me, hey, if the bandsaw has drift, you don't have it set up right. And I've heard that thing 1,000 times if I've heard it once. But we're going to talk about that. The other thing I saw is today I watched a video that came out, I think yesterday, from Fine Woodworking Magazine. And I have to tell you, I was totally shocked. This is a company that is just awesome. They really know what they're doing. They have a good reputation as far as I'm concerned. But this blade drift thing video, it is totally off the mark as far as I'm concerned. Totally wrong. Now, what they said was accurate. The problem is they made it sound like that was the fix-all. And that's not true. There are many factors that can create blade drift. And what they showed you was only one aspect of that. So let's go over some of these things. Let's talk about the myths first here. First, let's talk about the myths. They are a bad blade. You got it from the factory and it has drift. Piece of junk. No. Table saw not aligned. Your table saw, this is one of the ones that they said, is that the table saw wasn't square. Well, and they showed you how they took their saw and readjusted it to make it square. The only problem with that is not all bandsaws had that situation to be able to adjust. My bandsaw, from what I see, there ain't no way I can do that. It has a plate, and the trunnion sets down in there and sets up against the flat edge to line everything up when you bolt it down. So there's no way to sit there and take this thing and tweak it to be straight. And you shouldn't have to. You should be able to have it all nice and straight from the factory and be done with it. And so, table being the problem, yes, it is possible that is the problem, but the way you compensate for that is you make sure you set it up right to begin with from the factory. That's a one-time setting, and that should never be a factor again for your bandsaw being out of whack, for blade drift especially. So, the blade's not centered on the wheel. This is another thing. You hear people talking about it. Oh, put the gullet of the blade right in the center. Oh, put the center of the blade right in the center. Oh, put it all the way forward. Put it all the way back. And I'm here to tell you that that depends on the blade. Now, you can use centering the blade on your wheel to help get you. Sometimes it'll actually fully compensate for the drift. Sometimes it'll only partially help. And by that, I mean the blade is in the center. And as you adjust the wheel, you see that blade moving to the back or to the front, depending on which way you turn it, as it's turning. And you can see that blade travel back and forth. If you put that blade all the way forward and do a blade drift test, make note of it, turn that blade and move it all the way to the back of that wheel, and do another test, you'll see you have two different blade drifts. And what that tells me is, okay, can I get halfway between those two marks? Well, sometimes you can, and so you can align it strictly by using your wheel to align your blade drift. But that's not always the case either. Sometimes the blade drift is too great to be compensated on such a skinny wheel. If you had a wheel that was 2 inches wide, you stand a better chance of being able to use that method and make the drift go away. But they don't put 2-inch wheels on these that I know of, at least not on something this size. So that is only a partial answer, and there are those that swear that you just said it one way, all blades are set the same, and that's just not true. That's a myth. So, blade not centered. The other thing is they say, well, the fence itself is not square. Well, if the blade is cutting at an angle, you don't want that to be square. You want it set to the angle of that drift, and then that takes care of your problem. Let it drift away because you're following the fence. Your drift is going to be right there, so you will get that straight cut accurately. Rather than fighting that drift, just compensate for it. And that's what I do. I always compensate for my drift, whether I'm using it as a rip fence or as a crosscut sled. I always make sure that this is set compensating for that drift, to know that then when I cut something, it's going to be cut accurately. So just establish that drift and you'll be much better off, and just compensate for it. So all these other myths, no. So what have we learned here? First off, yes, make sure all your settings from the factory are set. That's a one-time thing. You should never have to set those ever again once you set this up. So in that respect, you make cure all your woes if you never did that to begin with, and for years you have a bandsaw blade that drifts, and then you set the square and all of a sudden miraculously it doesn't drift anymore. Yeah, you probably should have done that to begin with. But I still get blade drift even though mine is set directly like it's supposed to be from the factory. And I can put a blade on here and it track true, put another blade on there and have it track with the drift. So it is more because of the blade than because of anything else when you get blade drift. And like I said too, you can get blade drift in a blade from using it. So depending on how much you abuse that blade, and believe me, I can abuse a bandsaw blade with the best of them. I have, and I do. And if I do that, that can affect the blade drift. And so sometimes I have to readjust the blade drift. So keep in mind, always establish what your blade drift is, whether you use a laser or a simple bevel gauge, or cut a piece of wood at the right angle to show that angle to give you that reference. Whatever that blade drift is, just have something there ready to use to reestablish that blade drift on your fence if you need to, or to check it. Every now and then, you have to adjust those things because your blade drift will change on a blade. I've seen that happen too. So keep in mind, there is no single answer. Be prepared with the established angle, whether it's simple or fancy. You can adjust for the blade drift and solve all the problems. So don't listen to all these myths. Go through the few basic steps. Make sure everything is nice and square. Set your wheel on the center. See what kind of blade drift you have. If it's a very small amount, there's a good chance you can adjust it with the wheel. If it's a lot, which sometimes it is, don't fight it. Just adjust it on your two fences instead and keep that adjustment angle readily available to you the whole time you have this blade on here, because when you change that blade out, I guarantee you that drift angle will change. So that's it. That's the myth of show me. I don't agree with all those things you hear out there. Anybody that says that I'm wrong about something, I would love to hear it, because what I'm talking about here is what I've learned about it, what I've seen firsthand. And most of my, one thing I have to say, everything that I've seen has been based on one bandsaw and one bandsaw only, or listening to people talk about their bandsaw and discussing it back and forth. So I would love to hear what other people have to say about drift on their bandsaw. But all in all, get rid of that bad information. Think about it for a minute. You don't care what that drift is. I don't care what that drift is. As long as I know what it is, I can work around it. And that's what I do. So get a good night's sleep. Don't stay up night worrying about how to fix the blade drift. Just compensate for it and be done. Anyway, so much for my show me. I want to thank you for stopping by. I hope I didn't ramble on too much. But if you have somebody out there that says one thing or another, and things that we talked about here, don't be afraid to call them out on it, because there is so much bad out there. It just drives me crazy. So thank you for coming by to my show me. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. If you learned something here today, or if you like this video, please say so. Most importantly though, please come back, because we're nowhere near done. Thanks, and we'll see you again, hopefully very soon.